You seem to have very big like that. How are you doing?
I'm okay, just.
All right. Okay, folks, we're live.
We're
So
live.
let's get going. Welcome everyone to Revisioning Democracy Podcast, Episode 5, Stopping the Soft Coup. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder, along with my partner Donnie Jokum, of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division, which is the bookstore we are in right now. Thank you. The Bureau is an all-volunteer queer bookstore, and we have been in existence since 2012, and we've been here at the LGBT Community Center since 2014. And we have regular bookstore hours Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. And then we stay open late when we have events such as this. And we have a couple more Revisioning Democracy podcasts coming up. Even one right before the election.
Right. Yeah.
No, this is
right
the
after,
one
2
right
days
before that.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is the one right before the election. And then one a couple days after. So we'll continue. And then also later in November and in December. So please keep following. Before I turn things over to AC and Jay Walker, I wanted to read a land acknowledgement and a statement of solidarity with the people of Palestine. And then we'll jump into it. So the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to join the Bureau in signing up to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. And you can find out more at mannahattafund.org. I'd also like to read a statement of solidarity with the people of Palestine. As queer people, we know the pain of being cast out. We have been and continue to be despised by many, even by our own families and communities of origin. This reality evokes in many of us a deep empathy with others who are likewise seen not as fully human, but as problems to be solved, questions for which the answer is ultimately elimination and erasure. As we watch the ongoing genocide of Palestinians by the State of Israel, carried out with the full support of our government and funded by our tax dollars, we witness the inevitable results of defining a people solely as a threat to the safety and well-being of those deemed inherently worthy of life. This horror compels us to speak out not only against the current bombardment and siege of Gaza by the State of Israel, but against the historical and ongoing violent displacement of Palestinians by Zionists and the conditions of occupation and apartheid under which Palestinians have been forced to live for over 75 years. In our longing for a very different reality, we take inspiration from the words of Jose Esteban Munoz, who wrote, "Queerness is essentially about the rejection of a here and now and an insistence on potentiality or concrete possibility for another world." And that is from his book, Cruising Utopia, a book we sell here at the Bureau. And now I will turn it over to Anne-Christine Tedeschi and J.W. Walker.
Thank you very much.
Hi, AC.
Hi, Jay.
I'm back.
I know, I'm glad.
It's
Glad
good
you're
to
back
see
and you're
you.
well.
Thank you.
So I just want to welcome everyone both in here at the Bureau and also online. We're very pleased with Revisioning Democracy to be able to have the support of the Bureau. And of course, we encourage everyone to come to the bookstore and really take a look at these amazing books that are here. Tonight, we're going to be, I think, engaging in probably a pretty sobering conversation in some ways. But before I want to say, just to welcome everyone on behalf of the Gen Democracy, which is the organization and our campaign, Stop the Coup 2025. Revision Democracy is very much a an offshoot of that campaign. And our goal has been to educate and mobilize Americans and others around the project of stopping Project 2025. And a couple of days ago, we released a pretty big report, multi-part, on the unfolding agenda. And that really was looking at how Project 2025 is already unfolding. And so what we wanted to do tonight was, we have three wonderful guests. We wanted to be able to really have a conversation about the theme of today's broadcast, which is stopping the soft coup. In other words, the coup is already happening in many ways, and we want to take a look at what has been done or not done in terms of trying to put a brake on it or stop it over the past year. We also want to look at what we might expect if there should be a Republican victory. Conversely, if the Democrats win, we know that the Christian right that's behind Project 2025 isn't going to stop. And so that'll be the sort of the conversation, and our format will be that we'll have three speakers. We'll speak them a little bit, and then we'll open it up for a real conversation and have plenty of time for questions at the end of our broadcast. So Jay, do you want to just say hello before we get into that?
Oh, I already did, didn't I?
I tend to speak in paragraphs, so I try to slow down here.
Well, no, I mean, it's important that you bring up the fact that this is an ongoing coup, and you can look at it at a micro level and talk about how things have been moving forward legislatively, really, for the last decade or so. This sort of move, this Christian nationalism movement, the rise of it. You can also look at it as being something that's been going on for 9 to 50 years, really, with the launching of the Heritage Foundation. Every time there's a conservative president, they put a different report and a different mandate for leadership document in front of that conservative president, and every conservative president puts a significant amount of that into action. And so we're kind of at the kind of the culmination of this 44-year project of turning our country little by little, death by 1,000 cuts, from a functioning representative democracy into an autocracy. And that's why it's so important that we work to stop this now.
With that said, I think one of the things we're hoping to do tonight with our first guest, and really with all of them, but is to talk about what some of these proposed attacks are, and maybe, whether we've seen them before, whether we saw them under Bush, whether we saw them under the first administration of Trump. Yes, you're right, that it is a long project. On the other hand, this was something that was really developed in 2022. And just to repeat for those who don't know anything about Project 2025, this is a 4-part project. And it is backed by millions of dollars that have come from, in part, Leonard Leo, one of the lawyers who was behind seating a lot of the conservative judges. It has about 104 advisory groups who represent the major conservative groups in the country. And several of them are really leading the current judicial attack. And as we see this week and last week and the week before, an escalating attack on fair voting and what we call election integrity, which is the new battlefront. So with that said, I'm going to just welcome James Goodwin, who is with the Center for Progressive Reform, as well as Steve Lenkart, who is with the National Federation of Federal Employees, a union, and also Bill Fletcher, who is a journalist, an activist, and an author of several books. We're going to go ahead and start with James. And James, I just want to read a little bit of a bio, just so folks who can be familiar with you, and then we'll kind of get the ball rolling looking at the current attacks right now. So James is a JD and an MPP, is a lawyer, and he's a policy director at the Center for Progressive Reform. It's a wonderful organization. I urge you to take a look. They have great materials up, and every week he and his colleagues have been collating all of the news about Project 2025 for a listserv. So you can see that if you want to join that and get sort of every week updates of all the news on Project 2025. He joined the Center for Progressive Reform in 2008. Before that, he was a legal intern in environmental law at the Environmental Law Institute, Ecologic. He's done a lot of publishing of articles on human rights and environmental law. And he has a very high list of honors from his academic careers. But I also want to say one thing that I really enjoyed, because I had to go look it up, is that he is a member of the Order of the Coif, or the Coif, as we'd say in French, and the Phi Beta Kappa. And I understand that is an academic degree. But of course, I thought of it in terms of, probably being something that people with good style or hairdressers were a member of. So you know what that is. He is a member of the Order of the Coif. James, I wanted to start with you because we well, we first spoke around January or February of this year, right after we had launched Stop the Coup 2025. And at the time, we were already very keenly aware that there were just an incredible length, like a book length certainly, but many proposals that were fundamentally envisioned to dismantle the federal government, and particularly do this in a kind of way of rewriting law and regulations. And you are a regulatory law expert. And as we talked about it, you were saying, people probably don't realize what kind of attack this really is because we've never had one. So could we start right there and say, what is the area that you work in, and why are you well poised to talk about what Project 2025 may be trying to do?
Yeah, so I come to this, or I came to Project 2025 as somebody who studied something called administrative law. And even if you've been to law school, you probably don't know what that is. Like when I was in law school, administrative law was like the AV club, just the real big nerds were like the people who focus on administrative law. But as it turns out, it's really important stuff. Just in the last couple of years, the big Supreme Court cases have dealt with administrative law. So if you've heard of the Chevron case, Loper Bright, that's an administrative law case, and now Project 2025, right? And that's how I happen to stumble upon Project 2025. Is I think a lot or research a lot about how the role that the administrative state, so all these agencies like EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, Food and Drug Administration, and so on, and the processes and institutions that they rely on to implement the law, how that plays a major role in our democracy, and how that plays a major role in shaping a fair economy, right? And so one of the things I've been watching closely is how the Biden administration for the last few years has been taking steps to like adjust administrative law doctrines in key ways, or create new institutions, or refine old ones to make the administrative state more democratic and to help shape a fairer economy. So that's sort of like the one side of the scale. The other side of the scale is in early 2023, Project 2025 descends. And what it paints is a very different picture of what the administrative state is and should be. And there is a very authoritarian vision, right? Complete opposite of what the Biden administration has been putting together. And there, it's a Christian nationalist vision. It's one that seeks to create state-sanctioned oppression and hierarchy in various ways, racism, patriarchy, homophobia, you name it, right? But this has always been like key to like the conservative thought, right? What was different about Project 2025 and what really caught my attention was that that the starring role that the administrative state was playing in advancing this agenda. Because historically, the way conservatives have thought about the administrative state is just something they want to get rid of, right? There's that famous quote from Steve Bannon where he talks about the goal of the first Trump administration was to bring about the deconstruction of the administrative state, right? But what's going on in Project 2025 is very different. It actually
Well, they say they want to do that, but in fact, they're seeking to transform it and weaponize it in many ways, right?
Right. There's a lot of construction, not deconstruction, but construction going on, all in the service of building an authoritarian system of government and a Christian nationalist system of government.
I want to go through some of the proposed attacks that and really maybe start with the executive branch. But before I do, I just want to say, when we talked last, what's been 8-9 months now, one of your goals at the Center for Progressive Reform was to create a website, or to create some kind of way of accounting or having a yardstick for our progress in maybe being able to preemptively either address policies or laws or things, and kind of have almost like a threat matrix, which other groups have been doing, to say which of these threats are the most possible and likely in the first parts maybe of an administration, if of course Donald Trump wins the election. Can you just tell me quickly where you are with that part of your project?
Yeah, so we've been working collaboratively collaboratively with other groups like Democracy Forward on charting this out. I mean, the real the real focus is figuring
That was a
out
sigh.
what is figuring out what is like most plausible, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And as it turns out, a lot of what makes Project 2025 scary is like what makes the best horror film scary, is that element of plausibility, right? And there's so much in there that's just really, really plausible. That is to say, there isn't a lot of like legal tools or obstacles you can set up to really stop them. I mean, your best hope is just to slow them down and run out the clock on 4 years. And so that's really what we've been focusing on those, because, and then, you know, there's some litigation you can do, but really we've been focused on building up advocacy strategies, things that you do with members of Congress, things you do with mass protests, mass movements, that sort of thing.
So, you know, in a moment, we're going to be moving to Steve, who's going to be talking about one of the aspects of that, which is the attacks on the federal workforce. But I just want to list a couple of things that have been kind of raised as possibilities, you know, just to give people who are not so familiar with Project 2025. One of the ways that we know that they propose to kind of change the government is to, as Steve will talk about in a minute, you know, massively replacing the federal workforce using an executive order called Schedule F, bringing in 20,000 or more conservative loyalists that they've recruited and trained and put through an administrative course, and also put in place or change the rules in terms of the authority that people will get, so that on the very first days of the administration, the idea is they're going to go in with what's called a 180-day playbook. Now, we don't know all the contents of this playbook. They have not publicized it. There has been some discussion about it, but we know that at this point, they have finished hundreds of executive orders and directives and others. So on the other side, the groups that you've been working with, Steve, and other folks, there have been working groups that are focused on all the different aspects of the possible attacks of the weaponization of government, whether it's democracy, areas of health, climate, et cetera. So I just wanted to kind of talk about a few things that we know of that could maybe be within the very first attacks that scare people so much. And one of them is, as I will talk about in a minute, Schedule F, the idea of being able to come in and massively fire people who are in the merit system or who are political appointees and have been there and apolitical, and put in your own people. And the other piece of that is then getting rid of the authority or the independence of the different federal agencies and weaponizing them, whether it's the Department of Justice or the FBI or the IRS, and eventually even going after any number of people if they don't agree with your agenda. But all of this really is with the assumption also that you're giving supreme powers to the next GOP president, who would be Trump. So can we talk right there and say, what are your own views about things that you are the most worried about in the early possible days of a new administration? Even what are you seeing might be coming in through executive order? I'm just going to give you a couple of mine, just to give you thoughts about whether you agree. I would say that what we're looking at possibly, we're seeing, of course, along with Schedule F, we're seeing giving over new powers to people who would be put in positions. We're seeing executive orders potentially on climate, freezing them overnight, possibly a transgender ban, a Muslim ban, policies with regard to immigration of keeping people in Mexico. We're looking at the possibility of resurrecting something called the Alien Enemies Act, which would be basically deporting people who you're seeing from enemy countries. And then we've got a bunch of things with regard to the health programs. And but I really see that the executive branch and putting in place the infrastructure for people to come in and take over is where they're starting. So what are your thoughts? James?
Yeah. So, I mean, Schedule F, right, is really like the glue that holds all of Project 2025 together, right? You can talk. What's that?
It is one.
Yeah. And why that is because like the professional civil service, the career civil service, right, is what really maintains like the administrative state's abiding by like the rule of law, right? And without that, it makes so much of this other stuff so much easier. All the other bad individual recommendations that are spread out, right? And so, I mean, you sort of saw it like in the first Trump administration, or hopefully the only Trump administration, like how critical the career civil service were in pushing back, slowing things down.
They were guardrails.
Yeah, right. Like, in protecting their independence really was like what was critical to averting disaster, right? And Schedule F is all, it's fundamentally designed to eliminate that safeguard. And so when you talk about other things like, implementing the Comstock Act, right? This is this law from the late 1800s aimed at
Birth control.
Preventing mail order birth control.
criminalizing sending like abortion materials and that sort of thing through the mail. I mean, without independent career civil servants, something like that just seems so much more plausible, right? And that's what, like, the point I was trying to make before is what the scariest parts of Project 2025 are the ones that are most plausible. So like there's things like we're going to, move the US back to the gold standard. Like, that would be terrifying, but it's never going to happen. Congress would have to pass a law and it's never going to happen. It's this kind of stuff, like the Schedule F stuff, the Comstock Act enforcement stuff, the Insurrection Act stuff, all this stuff where, the designers of Project 2025 have sort of found the weak points within our constitutional system, within our administrative state. And much of Project 2025 is designed to like exploit those weak points. So, the example
I want to go to Stephen's Schedule F in a minute, but before we do, I just want to talk about the executive branch. Just in a simple way, how do you think they are going to give President Trump expanded powers? How would they do that? What is the how here? What is the mechanism for this, in your view?
I mean, it's the consolidation of powers, one. So things like eliminating independent agencies, eliminating the tradition of judicial enforcement, independence of the Department of Justice, expanding enforcement powers.
But this can't be through an executive order. There's no possibility he can do an executive order to give himself supreme power. That's not possible.
Well, some of it comes through the courts. Some of it is just the president takes these powers, right? And then nobody pushes back. So you need like an acquiescent Congress, you need an acquiescent judiciary, and you need an acquiescent civil service, right? That's where Schedule F really comes in important.
Okay. So Steve, I'm going to just do a quick intro to you and then let's talk about Schedule F. Steve is the executive director of the NFFE since 2016. And he's been in senior leadership appointments under both Democratic and Republican presidential administrations, continues to maintain very strong bipartisan relationships with the U.S. Congress and the executive branch. And he served also as the executive director of the U.S. Merit Systems Protection Board, the MSPB, which is the agency that's kind of in charge of enforcing the merit system and best practices in the executive branch, which has 2 million federal employees. And prior to that, he was Deputy Undersecretary acting at the Department of Homeland Security, Chief of Staff and Director of Operations to the first Chief Medical Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. And he was also a senior staff member at the House Committee at the Homeland Security. And earlier than that, he had other positions, primarily looking in areas of unions with the SEIU, as well as legislative director for the National Association of Government Employees. So I just want to say thank you, but I just want to note also, just off the subject of politics, he also worked as a police officer, a firefighter, an EMT, and chief of staff to a state senator. So you know who to go to in an emergency. Steve, welcome so much to the program. And I just, you and I started talking again around the same time as with James, where I was reaching out to say, what are the federal unions doing? How can they protect their federal workforce? Is this going to be possible? What do we need to do? Who's mobilizing? So first of all, for people who don't know, just give a little quick definition of Schedule F and how we've seen it or not seen it up until now.
So thanks. It's great to be here, and thanks for that warm welcome. I do have my resume is pretty thick. I debate whether or not to put all these jobs up on LinkedIn because it looks like I can't hold a job.
Always put the firefighter job.
People think I can't hold a job, but so Schedule F is started actually in the Trump administration. So we've already had Schedule F. It was only for the past last few months of the Trump administration, and it was taken out. What Schedule F is, as James said, it is pivotal for Project 2025 to work. And the reason why they need Schedule F to work for Project 2025 is they need full control of the executive branch. They need to do it without the resistance of career civil service employees who will enforce the law and who will resist illegal and unethical orders from superiors. They will report fraud, waste, and abuse to inspector generals and the FBI and so forth. And it happens every day across the government at every level. So that was a huge problem for them when the Trump administration came in. And as James said, the Federal Civil Service did slow down quite a bit of unethical and illegal actions that were requested by the Trump administration and their appointees. The civil service, they're used to presidents coming and going and political winds swinging from one way to the other, but never had they been faced before with so many unethical and questionably illegal acts. Including anywhere from procurement, contracting work, sending it to friends with a wink and a nod, to HR, questionable HR, human resource actions against people who were targeted intentionally for, resisting or for reporting people to law enforcement authorities and so forth. So they learned that the career workforce is a problem, so they came up with Schedule F. And what Schedule F does is it does two things. First of all, it allows the president to hire as many political appointees as they want. Right now, they're capped at about maybe 4,000 or 5,000, give or take, how you count them. And typically, the president doesn't even hire at all 4,000 or 5,000, but those positions are on the books. Schedule F would allow an unlimited number of appointees, and unlike regular political appointees that have to leave when a president leaves, they are not permanent employees of the government. Schedule F would allow these appointees to stay within government permanently. Knowing the government, the way that I do, because we have 2 million people, these appointees will get lost. So we'll have political operatives with career jobs being paid by the taxpayers, working in government somewhere that we'll lose track of, and they'll all have their little private agendas and report to whoever their gatekeepers are outside of government, be it industry or be it political heads or corrupt billionaires, whomever has these people working in the government, and the taxpayers are paying for it. So it's a great deal for people who are corrupt. The second thing Schedule F does, it enforces the
what we're talking about, how many people, like the first time around and then this time around, what are we looking at?
So the first time around, nobody went to Schedule F because the career people delayed it as long as they could. And that includes actually a lot of political appointees from Trump, the Trump administration themselves, who saw that this was a very, very bad idea to politicize and corrupt the executive branch. So political appointees from Trump's own people said, we're not going to do this. And they just watched the clock tick out. But a very conservative estimate is 100,000 people. I think the way that Schedule F is written is it allows anybody who has a policy interaction with policy to be converted over to Schedule F. And that was my second point. Career people who now have civil service protections, who don't have to fear intimidation and coercion and political overreach because they have resources where they can fight these things. If you're under Schedule F and Schedule F allows the forced conversion of civil servants over, you lose all those protections. You become essentially a political appointee against your will. You don't have any protections to fight for your job. And so when somebody comes to you to threaten you and say, hey, do this following thing or you're fired, or if you don't do this, we're going to bring you up in charges and have you arrested, which is another game they play. That's the real problem with the career part of the government, is that career people now who are good people and want to serve their country in a civilian capacity will no longer be able to. They'll be forced over into these political positions, and they will be subject to the whims of whatever political masters are under them or over them.
And Steve, we're also seeing that right now, these, sort of operatives for the Trump campaign, the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025, are kind of bragging about having lists of people who are career civil servants working in government now, who've been working in government 10, 20, 30 years, however many, that are literally being targeted right now, so that if Trump wins, they're going after them. What are the NFFE and other unions, organizations within government doing to sort of protect those people? Are they identifying these folks and giving them counsel?
So you're right. There's absolutely a list, and some of that list has been leaked over time, and there are hundreds of people who are aware they're on the list. A lot of these people are retirement eligible, so they know they're going to be they're targeted, so they're going to leave government, which is a shame because these are fully vetted, fantastically armed with knowledge, institutional savvy people who are going to be losing from this. So you're right, that list is out there, and ordinarily we would use that list as evidence against someone and charge them with the crime of targeting feds, but if they're moved over to Schedule F, we lose the ability to do that. So what we're doing right now is we're trying to stop Schedule F from being legal, from giving the president the ability to convert people over to Schedule F or hire under Schedule F, and we're doing that through a law that's draft legislation that's been on the books for 4 years, the past 2 Congresses. And it is simply a law to make Schedule F like authorities illegal. You can't force people into Schedule F into political positions of their career, and you can't have unlimited permanent political appointees within government. So the problem is we've had trouble getting that law passed. We got it passed in the House when Democrats controlled the House in the last Congress, 117th Congress. We gave it to the Senate 5 times in 5 different bills, and the Senate, who was unfortunately controlled by the Democrats at that time, didn't pass it. And we're having the same problem now. Here we are, we're 1 minute to midnight, and we're still struggling to pass Schedule F authority in the Senate.
Chuck Schumer? Where's Chuck Schumer on this, Steve?
So Leader Schumer, he's been slow to make this a priority. He's had other priorities, AI and some other things that he's been able to get through if he really wants it to get done. I've been critical of Leader Schumer on this front. This is although a politically charged issue, there's no money attached to it, so there aren't any congressional budget office scores or anything like that that would complicate this. And I think it would be good to force a vote on this and force Republicans to show in a roll call vote, do you support corruption or do you not support corruption? So if there's any way to put pressure on Leader Schumer, especially if anybody lives in the state of New York, or if your organization does business with Leader Schumer or the Democratic leadership in the Senate, this is the time to put pressure on them and say, this law is there. They know it's there. They're very well aware this law is ready to go. They need to get it done.
All right. We're going to turn in a minute to Bill Fletcher. Before we do, Steve, I just want to get a sense from you just on an emotional level and a professional level. Your job is on the line. The federal unions, they want to shut them down. You are not going to have the capacity to represent all these people you now help if this stuff goes through. And we talk about Schedule F, but the other piece of it, from what I understand, is something called the abuse of the Vacancies Act, right? Which is when you move somebody over from the accepted service, you put them into this other category of being a political appointee or essentially being a Schedule F, that position becomes vacant essentially. And that means whoever you put in, it gets putting into what it's called an acting position. Now, traditionally, those people don't stay that long. They might stay a month, they might stay 2 until you fill in the position. In this case, they're proposing to give new authority to those people in acting positions so that they can essentially change policy. And they haven't been elected by anyone, they haven't been approved by the Senate. These are people they're putting in. So I want to know, first I want you to answer the first question, which is how is everyone feeling? What are you seeing? We understand that people are polishing their resumes and getting ready to get out, but what's happening? And what's happening with the unions? What conversations are happening in terms of your own viability, your own future to represent the workforce?
Yeah, obviously, we're very concerned. If they want to move union people into Schedule F, then we no longer would have the right to represent them. We would go to the courts immediately, try to get an injunction. It's all legal stuff at that point in time. This is a group of people, they're used to breaking the law and they're used to challenging Congress and the courts to catch up to them. And of course, now with the July 1st decision from the Supreme Court that greatly expanded presidential powers with absolute and presumptive immunity, and also limited the courts and the Congress's ability to question the motives and conduct of a president. That makes it even harder for us now to go to court and say, here's an injunction, and you know, we need to continue representing our people, and,
Is there any
and as
history for
the law
injunctions
requires.
working?
Sorry?
Is there a history? Sorry to interrupt. Is there a history where injunctions have worked that you can point to here?
Well, we had a couple of executive orders from the Trump administration that did a lot of this kind of work, tried to take the teeth away from unions and take away our ability to represent our members. We were successful in taking them to court, but it took, you know, it took a long time. It took a couple of years to get a final determination out of the courts, and by that time it was coming to the end of the administration. Ideally, you know, the courts are not an answer for us. We do need, you know, the existing law enforced. We need to shut down. The conversations are that we need to shut down a president that has, you know, extraordinary powers. We've never had this before in the 237 years since, you know, the Constitutional Convention. We have new powers now for the president, and those are going to be a challenge for us. And we need Congress and the judiciary to stand up to a president that, you know, unfortunately has been, you know, ordained with all these new authorities.
So I'm going to introduce Bill. Bill, welcome. Bill Fletcher is a journalist and labor advocate. He's a creative writer, and he's been really raising public attention to Project 2025's threats to labor, including Schedule F and the American economy. And he's the author of a bunch of books on labor, including They're Bankrupting Us and 27 Other Myths About Unions, which is with Beacon Press in 25. And there's a long list of books, but really what I want to say is look up Bill's books and read some and buy some, because he's got strong opinions, he's very well informed, and he's got a really good analysis. And one of the reasons, Bill, that I wanted you to come here and talk with us is because you're coming from a progressive and left perspective. You have a strong view about supporting organized labor, but also you've been focusing on the movement building. So as you're hearing our conversation, I just wonder, first of all, just as a pullback start, you know, what is kind of foremost in your mind right now as you're watching this come down, knowing that there's this template for essentially a real attack on both the federal workforce, but also many of the sort of laws and policies that have been won that support workers' rights, that protect people on the job, that protect consumers and the public from, you know, whether it's in air, water, safety, et cetera, essentially just consumer protections. What's on your mind right now?
Thank you for having me. There's a couple things on my mind. One is that, with all due respect to the title of your group, we're not looking at a coup. We're looking at something that's equivalent to someone having been poisoned by curare. And that is a slow-acting poison that slowly but surely paralyzes different parts of the body until it gets to the brain. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying that not to be semantical, but to understand that looking at this moment, it's sort of the convergence of the development of a right-wing populist movement, which we now know as MAGA, along with the growth of what I've called the neoliberal authoritarian state. And it actually relates in a funny way to what Steve was saying about the problem with Schumer. In other words, there has been a growing authoritarianism within the US state that you can date back to the 1970s. And this is something that's gone through Democratic and Republican administrations. Now, I'm not saying that in order to be agnostic in terms of this election. I'm saying this to say that there has been this tendency that's been growing, and the authoritarianism has been insufficiently challenged in either party, and certainly I'm really holding the Democrats responsible for not having challenged more openly. So that's the first thing I'm thinking about. The second thing is that I'm scared to death, because I think that when I look at all of this, one of the things about Republicans is that they move at blitzkrieg speed. when they take over, as opposed to Democrats who, when they take over the presidency, in general, they want to be the adult in the room. They want to reach out, be bipartisan. Let's have tea and coffee. Let's all work this out. We've got to have understanding. Republicans don't care about that. They move the tanks across the border, and the troops are right behind. And so one of the things that's going to affect us is the swiftness of change is going to paralyze many good people. Because, and you can see it in actually many of the polls, that a lot of people do not expect Trump to do what he is saying he's going to do. And I'm saying that both among actually Trump supporters, as well as among progressives who don't see how this election is really critical. They're basically, oh, no, he's not going to really do that. And when it actually happens, I'm sorry, what?
Say, well, it's exceptionalism. We had this idea like other countries had, whether it's, I mean, this happened in every country we've talked to so far and looked at. People say it just can't happen here, even though
That's right.
it can happen. Even though there's
That's right.
It's not just a denial, it's an idea that, wait, we're founded on these things, and because we have never seen it here, therefore it can't happen here. It's hard for people to imagine it happening, even though we are seeing it
because
today, like the frog in the pot happening every day.
But that's because of historical amnesia. Because you see, the thing is, and it has happened here. It happened in the destruction of Reconstruction and the way that took place. It happened in the 1898 coup in Wilmington, North Carolina. It happened in the 1930s when a plot was hatched to carry out a coup against Roosevelt. It actually has happened here. But one of the things that happens after these is that history gets whitewashed, and people become comfortable in a certain kind of amnesia. So they think, well, yeah, it happened in Guatemala, it happened in Chile, but it didn't happen here. No, damn it, it has. And the question now that we're looking at is, what will be the variation here, and what will we do to resist? Because as Steve was saying, that a lot of the litigation, which is what people fall back into, we'll be the ones that are drawn out. Not to speak for you, Steve, but what it sounds like is that the MAGA folks are going to move quickly. Many of us are going to be trying to engage in litigation, trying to run to catch up to slow these people down. And they're basically going to say, you guys are chumps. By the time you get to court, this whole thing will be settled.
Well, let's want to talk about that, but I just want to say, just in my defense, and I know Jay has a question to say, the reason I call it a soft coup is because a coup is an actual regime change. It's a full change of administration, and that is what we are looking at. So whether it's in little drips or drabs, or the frog is in the pot boiling, or it's Guerrero, or whatever, the bottom line is that we have not seen the kind of regime change that is proposed by Project 2025. So in my mind, I look at it as a soft coup. I think it is a soft coup in the sense that it's not a military coup, but it is administrative. But the goal is the same, which is to forcibly cause a full change of administration and essentially gut the Constitution, gut civil rights, gut our democratic freedoms, and impose a regime that is there with loyalists who are in control with very little pushback from the judiciary or the Congress.
No, I get that. I'm not raising a criticism. Yeah. What I'm more saying is that for the audience, look at history, folks, right? Grasp history, and also understand that the problem is not just Trump. There is a mass movement out there. And we're good. And even if we're successful on November 5th, and even if Trump wins on November 5th in one way or another, and we have to carry out the long game, the reality is that the fact that we have to deal with a mass movement complicates this. It's different than when we had to deal with Nixon, where there wasn't really a mass, I mean, there are people that love Nixon, but there wasn't really a mass movement behind Nixon. That's all I'm trying to get at.
Gotcha. Jay?
Yes, so you brought this up a bit. We are dealing with a you don't want to go around insulting voters, you don't want to go around insulting your fellow American citizens, but we've had about 40 to 50 years of taking civics and government and sort of like lessons in what the United States is, and history, even history is becoming elective in our school systems, so that we have a very, very uneducated population when it comes to the Constitution, when it comes to the rule of law. Is it if you think about it, it's about 40 years. So if you are under 60 or so, odds are you got a substandard education in those areas, unless you went to a private school. And so my question then is, either way, let's say the best case scenario that Kamala Harris wins. We still have to deal with this, right? And you were just sort of alluding to that. We're still going to have to deal with the results of this long progressing attempt to turn our country into an autocracy. So what would you say like some of your prescriptions would be for sort of helping the American people and our elected officials get to a place of putting up enough bulwarks in the path of something like a Project 2029 or Project 2033?
It's a fascinating question, and I would say that what we're up against is the equivalent of dealing with mass illiteracy. So let's say that we had 75% illiterate population, and we want to do something. Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to begin a mass literacy campaign. I would argue that one of the central things that we have to do as progressives is political literacy. That part of the work that we have to do begins with helping people understand the way the politics and economics of this country works. When I was at the AFL-CIO in the 1990s, we began a program called Common Sense Economics, which was how to talk to workers about capitalism. And it was a great program, except most of the unions didn't really run with it because they didn't think it was actually necessary. And it was only years later that they said, oh my God, we should have kept this program going. That's the kind of thing that we really need to do. And see, the thing is, man, that there's no silver bullet here. If we don't engage in that mass political and economic literacy, we will keep running into the same problem. So I would say that would be the central thing. The second thing is that we have to talk with people about history and create our own narrative that explains why everybody feels bad. And that's one of the things that we got to acknowledge, man, that people feel bad. In terms of life, they feel bad, not just because of inflation, but feel bad about the environment, and they don't know what to do. What are we saying needs to be done? And so here we have to say the status quo is unacceptable, but what is being proposed by MAGA is a disaster. So if the status quo is unacceptable, then what do we do? That needs to be the second part of our work.
I mean, I just say the only counter to this is that, first of all, number one, we have to acknowledge populism is on the rise across Europe and the world. We're dealing with extraordinary forces that are impacting, and it's globalism, it's the economics, I mean, which is certainly the 1% of economy that's not trickling down. But I think also when you really spend time, like I've spent some time, most recently I was at a MAGA rally recently, a Trump rally, and others, but I talked to people who are Trump supporters who are in my own circles, in my own family. And, they're not particularly religious, but it seems to me that one thing I've really observed is that the interest and the support and the great just deciding to back Trump is very much because people are so needing community. They're feeling very lost, as you mentioned, that religion for them provides a narrative, a greater than narrative for them to say, all right, well, this is the world I want to go to because it gives me a structure, it gives me something to believe in. So the religious aspect is really very, very powerful. And of course, it has been weaponized. But if you look at it, I mean, it's really crazy. And one thing that I think we may not have spoken about, which is important for our program, for people who don't know about Project 2025, is that it is really a Christian nationalist agenda. Its vision is theocracy. It is going for a Christian state eventually. And the goal is to put all of our US secular law and policies to have that really be based on a specific interpretation of the Christian Bible. And so, it's important because it's not like we're not just dealing with civics, we're dealing with a whole other emotional issue that's within this, that is organizing people. And I think that it's just really important to recognize it, because when you look at who's going into power right now, all the people behind Project 2025 at the highest levels and who's funding them, these are really, really strong, incredibly ardent, super orthodox, militant, either Christians or Catholics, who who really believe that their belief system is what is motivating them. And in many cases, the average person who's out there supporting Trump, if they're in these religious groups and communities, they're there because all their community is there and they want to be there and they need to feel connected, and they're feeling a lot of grievance and outside, but the connection for them is this glue that they've been able to use religion and weaponize it to this extent. And we're seeing this in other countries, but it's very strong here. And in many ways, we have not dealt with that aspect of it. I don't want to get too far off of our, tonight's comment, but, we're not dealing with the role that religion has played for people in the positive sense that has given so much power to that movement, that they've been able to successfully weaponize it. People, they're not just getting together because they hate gay people. They're getting together because they like being with each other and they feel a sense of cause and community. And if we don't recognize that, then we're truly failing to understand what the problem is.
Well, what I'd add to that, though, is that the need for community, that sort of need for community, that's because we have had a systematic breakdown in people's trust in our institutions.
Absolutely.
And so because they've lost trust in institutions, they don't react on a rational level in terms of policy. Like I just saw a recent thing where people asked people about, they went to people and they asked them about Kamala Harris's policies and Donald Trump's policies without saying whose policies they were. And even among, people that were Republicans, people that said they were Trump supporters, they wanted more of Kamala Harris's policies than they wanted of Donald Trump's policies. So this isn't rational. This isn't about,
Exactly.
this is about an emotion. It's about an emotional thing, and religion plays into the emotional needs of people, which is why it's such an easy thing to manipulate people with, because it hits them at that core.
And it's also because it's addressing real needs they have. I'm just saying, if you're going to diagnose things, let's diagnose them well, and we've not done that. I want to turn a little bit back to this question of resistance, though, which I think we have a couple of minutes before we're going to take questions. And so, Steve, I want to start with you in terms of resistance. I mean, what has been happening inside the government? What's been happening inside every department and federal agency where they know what's coming down? We talked a little bit and you seemed pessimistic. You don't feel like that much has happened. I want to know really what you see is happening. And also at this point, we've got, a month maybe before we finally, maybe less than a month, where we'll get an answer about who won this election coming up. What is possible in this time to do, or what could be done, particularly to protect workers?
Yeah, I think like the rest of America within the civil service, there's a lot of denial for different reasons. I think in the rest of the U.S., the average citizen is just being unaware and not as Bill said, just not taking things seriously, not learning from history and so forth. Within the federal government, it's a lot of fear and anxiety, and I think they're putting it off until they have to worry about it. Which I haven't been very happy about that approach myself. I've been trying to push this a little bit harder, but even amongst my own colleagues, there is just a sense of, well, I'm not really sure what we can do. Let's just hope for the best, November, and maybe we won't have to deal with it, which is, one way or another, we're going to have to deal with this, whether it's now or 4 years from now, we're going to have to deal with this. So what is happening right now, I think, is a lot of waiting. I think between, if worst case scenario happens and Trump gets elected, I think between November and January, a lot of people are going to make a lot of decisions in the government about whether to stay or go. I do know that there will be some kind of guidance coming out to employees from an official source within the government, explaining some of their rights and some of the things they can do to be proactive to protect themselves. But again, we're dealing with something we've never dealt with before, and that's with the SCOTUS decision on presidential immunity, and with this Schedule F authority that's coming in that strips people of a lot of their protections, and they're not job protections; they're systematic protections to weed out corruption and political overreach. They're not job protections, and they're characterized as that as, that's just, civil servants, it's impossible to fire a Fed. 10,000 Feds get fired every year for cause. You can fire a Fed. But the narrative on that is it's hard for people to embrace right now. I think when the time comes after January, new administration comes in, Schedule F starts floating around, especially within our national security community and our law enforcement communities. They're going to have to make a lot of hard decisions because they're going to be asked to do a lot of illegal and unethical things, and they're going to have to say no, and they're going to have to risk their jobs, and they're going to have to, either take the threat or not the threat, or arrest their boss. I mean, I think it's going to go. It's going to turn into something that we've never seen before, and really, it's hard for people to kind of imagine in their minds that something could get so bad. I think there's just a little bit of denial for that reason.
Well, we do know that there's this one group, we participate in some working groups. We're not, it's not so much public, so we can't talk about too many details, but there certainly are groups, particularly lawyers groups, right? Federal workers or lawyers in the federal government who have been looking very concretely at every single major area of Project 2025 and really trying to kind of create an idea for themselves, a sense of scale, right? In terms of what is most likely to be attacked and where have we seen this before or not, and what are laws or policies we can use. And it's theoretical on one hand. On the other hand, it's not theoretical. I mean, if they try to do something like weaponize Chevron or LOPR or these things, we know these kinds of the possibility of how these Supreme Court decisions could be activated. So I just want to say to people listening, take heart, because actually there's a lot of very smart people with a lot of experience in government and outside of government who are working very, very actively on this and have identified a lot of strategies to counter it, but can't put anything in place, as you say, unless there's a concrete action taken, and then they can, of course, have the counter response. So, James, I want to say from your perspective, how do you assess the situation? What do you think has been achieved in these last 9 months in terms of the developing resistance or the developing understanding? And what do you think maybe we need to be keeping our eyes on, or what are you keeping your eye on in terms of what you think could happen in those very early days of January, end of January, if a new GOP administration comes in?
Yeah, so, I'd say there's been sort of 3 trains of action right now that all sort of mix together. One is the legal response, and I joke with my wife, I'm not a real lawyer, so I leave that to the real lawyers. But there are people who are putting together litigation strategies, figuring out who plaintiffs might be, getting resources for this, because litigation is not cheap. So that bucket of planning is going on.
The funding of lawsuits and mass lawsuits and protections for workers and all those things that will be needed.
Right, and even 8 years ago, you had the big white shoe law firms who would do pro bono work to help respond to Trump. They're not doing that. If there's a second Trump administration, we need new sources of funding. That's the reality. There's the advocacy bucket, right? And so there's been a really impressive response out of Congress, or at least in the House so far, of responding to Project 2025, a really strong effort to educate individual members about how the plan would affect, on a micro district level, right? How will these recommendations affect the members of your district, right? And really tailored to that kind of level.
I just want to maybe say to our listeners, there is a congressional task force on Project 2025. It's led by Representatives Jared Huffman, Ayanna Pressley, and there's lots of great folks in it, Jamie Raskin, Sean Casten, et cetera. And they've kind of taken lots of different pieces of this and led by different members of that task force in order to, whether it's focusing on one particular sector of the federal government or a specific agency, or as you say, how this would essentially be litigated or could impact on particular districts. That work isn't very public, although they've been doing, a lot of different things like House hearings for the public and others, behind the scenes hearings, brought in a lot of different experts. So that is a whole piece of work that's happening. We don't hear too much about it. We write a little bit about it, but it is happening in the corridors, particularly of power. And I think that's really where we wonder, what's the conversation that's happening? How is it changing? Can you give us any insights on that?
Yeah.
It's hard to really know how much people are responding. I mean, Steve, we talked about this. It's really hard. You don't feel like, Steve, much is happening, or you're really worried that everyone's just sitting back. I kind of get the other sense of it sometimes because I see so much activity on, particularly in the litigation area. We're hearing about these meetings happening constantly in Congress. What do you think
Right.
is going on?
It's what what sort of gives me hope is that like people understand like the complicated stuff, like Schedule F, right? If if I had, to guess, like, is there like an element of Project 2025, that would have been really hard for like, ordinary folks to like sort of grasp, not just like what it is, but what it means, like what its significance is. I would have said like, most people, but still like they get it, and it's like one of the most, when they do like polling on individual parts of Project 2025, like that's one of the things that like polls the worst, like people get it. So, if there is like a silver lining to all of this, I suppose it's that, people are getting a bit of an education now about like what our administrative state is and does, who our career civil servants are and are not, right? They're not these mythical, power hungry people. They're just ordinary folks, like ourselves, the people you sit next to at church or, go grocery shopping with, just happen to have a job that serves the public instead of working for a for-profit company, right? I think part of what's been gives me optimism, I guess, if I can put it that way, is that people do get a lot of this complicated stuff, and as a result, they are being confronted or being forced to confront like sort of components of our democracy that they never really had to think about, right? Our planes land safely for the most part, our trains get where they're supposed to, our drinking water is mostly safe, and we never really think about why that is. But the attack on the administrative state by Project 2025 is forcing more and more Americans to really grapple with that, right? And once that's sort of in the public zeitgeist or whatever, that's it's hard to take back, right? It really does shift the broader political conversation.
Well, I know I can sense Jay has a question, so I'm going to turn it over to him. But I just want to say one thing for me, the silver lining, and we can talk about this in a minute, Bill, is Project 2025 has not only educated but mobilized and politicized a lot of Americans that weren't thinking about this or weren't really thinking that much about their democracy at this level or the fact that these rights could go away. And so there's a huge investment, particularly around young people, and that certainly is the silver lining. The question is, what is it going to do in terms of mobilizing after the election, and how is it going to lead to resistance or organized resistance or social movement or any of that? So I just want to say, I'm going to turn it to Jay here, but Steve, keep in your mind that I want to talk about how has it changed for the federal workforce? What are you seeing in terms of, you're saying people are quiet, but they're absorbing everything. Are you seeing any organizing happening within the federal workforce that you haven't seen before? So I'm going to, Jay.
Well, by the time that I say something, then Steve will forget the question. So you just ask Steve a question. So ask Steve the question and then answer.
Oh, that's fine. Steve, I know you were saying that people are passive and waiting and scared, but are you seeing organizing by union activists, by workers in a different way, considering that they're feeling like existentially they're not just their jobs, but the thing that they care most about in terms of pieces of the federal government are fundamentally being threatened?
I really wish I saw more of it. I would love to tell you that there's, everyone's on point and we've got backup plans for backup plans and so forth. But I just can't. I do think we're woefully, underprepared. I'm very disappointed that we've had 4 years to learn from the tactics of the Trump administration. We passed very few laws, anti-corruption laws. We passed one election law that's, kind of, okay, but it wasn't great. I still can't get Schedule F passed, which, to me is a no-brainer. I'm worried that there's a lack of momentum and there's also a lack of people taking this seriously. I think when it does happen, if it does happen, I think it'll be a huge wake-up call, and you're going to see a burst of activity. I do hope that it doesn't come too late. Not so much for the people who work at unions and union members, but for the country itself, because it is really that grave. I wish I could give you more of a positive response on that, but that's just the reality right now. And that's also my frustration.
Well, and, you know, it's interesting that, you know, what they're trying to turn our government into is what our government kind of was at the end of the 19th century. You know, there were actually laws passed that changed our government so that we didn't have a patronage system throughout our federal government. And, you know, that goes to what you were talking about, which is the ignorance of history. And I'm curious because your work, your labor organizing work is mostly, you know, private sector unions, right, as opposed to
Oh,
government.
I actually worked for a federal sector union.
Oh, but you know, but I mean,
you
said that you've done work with private sector in the past as well, correct?
Right, private and public, that's correct.
Okay, but right now you're with the public sector.
Well, right now I'm consulting and I work with all kinds of unions.
Okay.
But what's interesting about your question and building on what Steve was saying is that, truth be told, most of the federal unions do not have a history of knowing how to mobilize their members and being confrontation. They're very used to litigation.
Mm.
And you know, grievances, arbitrations, lawsuits, etc. And so part of what we're grappling with, and maybe you were being diplomatic, Steve, part of what we're dealing with is there's a different kind of warfare that's going on that many of the leaders and members of federal sector unions are completely unprepared for. They're fighting the last war, and after the demise of the Trump administration, in the beginning of 2021, I think that there was an assumption that, well, we dodged a bullet, and we can go back to the normal way of operating, as opposed to understanding that the barbarians were still at the gates.
Yep.
They've just changed their tactics somewhat, but they have never given up the war. And I think that that's part of the problem that we're up against.
And that kind of goes back to what I think it was you, James, was talking about. You know, you were getting some action in with the House Democrats, but like Chuck Schumer is like basically like not paying any attention, hasn't been for the entire 4 years. And to that end, your organization, the Center for Progressive Reform, just put out a report in the last week about how all of the budgetary bills for fiscal year 2025 are, you know, while the Republican Party, all the elected Republican people and all the people in the Trump campaign were saying, oh, we don't know nothing about no Project 2025. They have literally larded Project 2025 policies throughout all of these budgets. I'd love to hear you speak a little bit about that.
And the deadline, right? Isn't the deadline the
It's
end of
December
the end of
20th. December
28th? So
yeah.
it's a bunch of poison pills, right?
Yeah.
We've got
That's
sitting
what
there.
Right. I mean, like, so nothing passes through Congress substantively, right? We don't do bills anymore. What we do is we pass budgets, right? And we try to tack little appropriations riders on there with little policy changes. And we're mostly used to conservatives. There's certain asymmetry there. And it's, you know, somebody handed me a list of the nearly 500 riders that are on this year's appropriations bill. I pieced through them painstakingly and found that over 300 of them fully overlapped with recommendations in Project 2025. So, you know, Trump can disavow Project 2025. Republican members of Congress can, you know, disavow Project 2025. Fact of the matter is, they're still using like the sneakiest and worst anti-democratic legislative gimmick, these appropriations riders, to still accomplish like the essential agenda of Project 2025.
Bill, I want to just shift our conversation here right now to January 21, 2025. Let's assume that Trump is declared or declares himself or steals back for whatever happens, and he becomes the de facto winner. You know, we've talked about the fact that there'll be this reaction. You know, we don't know what number of executive orders will start to roll out at what speed. We think it'll be pretty fast. I know, Steve, you think it's going to be rapid and that people are going to be super shocked. But what does that mean for our civil society? I mean, where are we taking to the streets? I mean, what do you see as not what our wish list is, but what do you actually see happening in your own looking at this in terms of the kinds of mobilizations we've seen. We certainly have seen mobilization, and we saw mobilization under Trump. We saw a lot of mobilization in terms of things like Black Lives Matter, and that's where we saw street mobilization. But where are the American people going to stand up, you think? And who's potentially in a position to be able to help guide that?
I want to start with the last part of that, because I look at if things go badly, it's going to be like December 7th, 1941.
1940.
And 1941 with Pearl Harbor. And the problem is that the shock of the attack is going to both wake up a lot of people, scare the hell out of a lot of people, and paralyze a lot of people. So the question of leadership becomes essential. And I think that one part of the answer is that there need to be a set of organizations, and I think some of them are talking now, that are actually developing the theory of the counterattack, right? So just like the Joint Chiefs of Staff on December 8th, 1941, were immediately meeting to figure out what are we going to do, right? Not crying, not saying, oh my God, right? But like, what is the theory of the counterattack? That's what has to happen. And
Do you see that
so there
happening?
needs to,
Do you see it happening now?
I think some of that is happening, and I think that it's more likely to happen now than what happened in 2016. In 2016, people were all over the place. The National AFL-CIO went on radio silence for months. I mean, a number of unions weren't saying or doing anything. I think it was true in other organizations. I think, obviously, the women's movement stood up with the march, but I think we need much more than a march. So I would say part of the thing is that there'll need to be mobilizations, but not just mobilizations willy-nilly. We're going to have to think about, we're going to have to think just like the right does. We have to think about, where does litigation fit in? What do we have to do in terms of legislation? And also, what are the weaknesses of the other side? How do we split them up? So part of the split we're seeing right now with the splintering off within the Republican Party, which is actually quite fascinating to witness. The issue is, how deep does that go? And that's why our opposition to MAGA, and this is going to scare the bejeebies out of a large part of the left, our response to MAGA is going to have to be very broad.
Yep.
There's no room for purism in this game. It's going to have to be very broad. And that's going to include some people that on the strategic long-term issues, we're going to be in fundamental disagreement on.
Well,
But
look,
in the shorter run,
in 1 year, many of the people on the left who would never have waved a flag are waving flags like we've never seen. I mean, the left has
Absolutely.
reclaimed patriotism in a way that we never would
That's
have
right.
thought. It's ironic, right, that many of the kind of symbols of what were the Republican Party are now kind of the standard bearer symbols for the Democratic Party. But I just wanted to
That's right.
shift over. We have a couple people in the audience. I'm just going to take at least one question here or two questions to give them the chance, and also maybe people online who might be nothing so far. Okay. Any questions? Oh, I'll come back. Well, I have one, which is to say that, you know, thinking about this, I mean, I don't know what groups are mobilizing. I've been looking. We're part of kind of left, New York City based, maybe to some extent out of the health sector, the AIDS movement, the women's movement. And I just have generally been seeing that, you know, for the past year or so, we're not seeing a lot of organized mass. I mean, people keep expecting mass movements. We're not going to have a mass movement. We haven't had one. There's lots of reasons for it. We may have a stronger common enemy, and certainly Project 2025 has brought a lot of people together in coalitions because it's a common enemy. But it's going to look very different from what we've seen. So I guess the question is, the lawyers who are doing resistance and the litigants, that piece of things is getting organized because they have very, very clear targets. And so they know, and they have expertise, and they know how to tackle it. But in terms of political organizing, that's going to be interesting to me. I think it's going to be sectoral. We have a multi-sectoral possibility because so many sectors are attacked. But that's more of what I see. I don't at all see, and I don't expect or don't even think it's realistic to expect that we're going to see the kind of, anti-war mobilizing, or you had maybe a small group of people who led a lot of people. I think we're going to have multi heads of mobilization, but maybe we get to a common agenda of priorities, possibly. But I'm just, I just want to put that out because I think that it's important to be realistic about what you want to try to do.
I just want to throw out a couple of concerns that I have. Well, one point that what we saw during the resistance to Trump from fall of 2016, through 2020 was we saw the activist resistance to Trump. We saw through the indivisible sort of movement, some of the sort of inside politics resistance to Trump. We didn't really see the civil society piece of it. And in our work, moving forward through, this work against Project 2025, we saw a real reticence among the leaders in the civil society organizations to really embrace this fight and to start elevating the concerns among the broad populace about Project 2025 until we got to the summer, basically late spring.
When Trump started to deny it, that's when people mobilized. But before that, we were really working very hard to sound the alarm, and we were in fact not getting much support. It's just important to talk about it because I think we expected so much solidarity, and what we found was, maybe realistically that people are used to kind of working from their base with the people that they work with, and they were not feeling like they could immediately jump and begin to look at other coalitions. There's a lot of work of trust. There's a lot of other work that goes into political organizing. So we weren't being unrealistic, but we were observing this. Now I think it's different. Many people organized, but again, maybe within their own small bases. And there was also a huge amount of duplication of effort. I mean, people duplicated the same kind of information that was already out there without asking for the people who had already done it. I mean, we've always been really trying to see, like, if somebody else is already doing something, we don't need to do that. There's so much else to do. That isn't necessarily the approach. And maybe the difference is that you don't always have activists. I mean, I come from this 90s background with ACT UP and the women's movement of activism being, you have a goal, you set a goal, you have a strategy, and you know what it's about. And it's not coming from the same basis, maybe, civil society organizations that have been created kind of with another sense of purpose.
But the other thing that I want to address to you all is this question of, this response that we're already seeing from the Democrats, which is bipartisan. I'm going to put a Republican in my administration. When we talked earlier, Bill, about the fact that this is like a curare poisoning, right? This is a 50+ year thing that the right has been doing to our body politic pretty much nonstop. They adjust, they react to situations on the ground, they shift, but this has been an ongoing process. And and there hasn't been a lot of, because we're so nervous about the election, there hasn't been a whole lot of holding to account all of these folks, like the Liz Cheneys of the world, like the folks that we consider now to be the reasonable, Reagan Republicans. And I'm sorry, Reagan Republican is no compliment in my book.
But it's ironic that in many ways you see people like the Lincoln Project who are, kind of
a bunch of former Republicans,
but who are being more shrill in many ways and more attacking on Project 2025 in many ways than some of the other organizations, because people are also, I mean, this gets into the base of how people do their political work in this time and era. People are afraid of losing their nonprofit status if they're nonprofits. I mean, there's a lot of issues that make people hesitate. And what we've been seeing in this moment, I think you talked about it, Steve, is this thing of like possibly a bit of paralysis as people are waiting to situate themselves to say, I don't know if I should have exposure. And I mean, I'm sitting here today thinking on the way here that I honestly was shocked to see that, the Washington Post did not publish an editorial on its presidential candidate. Why? Because it's such a given. It's a given in our assumption that major newspapers in America have a separate editorial and a newsroom, yes, and they may be owned by whoever owns them, but they are going to be able to have a degree of freedom. And when we see something like that fall away, and we saw it fall away 2 weeks ago with the LA Times, it really shakes us. It wakes us up to recognize that we're in a different reality right now. The question is, what's going to happen now? Who's going to speak out or not about that? What actions are going to be taken to support press freedom? So to me, it's not that things can happen or attacks can happen, but what is our response to it? And I think that's where we're really going to be focusing is resistance, survival, preparedness, whether or not, whoever wins the election, these people are not stopping, as you say.
I
Question?
just wanted to piggyback on what you're asking for, some kind of a plan for what the future is gonna be, how people are gonna resist on a forward way. But could we go back to something to add to that, what Bill said, which is about amnesia and developing programs to give people a civic education so they actually understand what's at stake. I wanted to hear more about that as part.
So let me just repeat the question. So Bill, the question is that, the person who's asking wants to know a little bit more about these program specific education and what might be possible, particularly if we need to fast track something like that, like what's worked, I guess, maybe, and maybe what's more behind it. If you
Do
could
we
say a
need
little
to
bit
have
more.
Schoolhouse Rock again? Is that what we need? I think we need Schoolhouse Rock again.
Yes.
Well, we actually, yeah, we need citizenship schools. Just like in the civil rights movement. But I'll tell you in terms of education on this, when the actress Taraji Henson started talking about Project 2025, all of a sudden it was game changer.
Right.
And so part of what we need is education and the mouthpieces. There need to be multiple mouthpieces. We need to actively create echo chambers. So we need the Taraji Hensons, we need other opinion makers out there that are saying to the public who may not be listening to this particular webcast, hey, wake up, right? So that's one part of it. But the other part of it is about organization. That part of whatever comes out going forward has to have an educational component. Now, this means we should not be waiting for the Democratic Party leadership to do anything. Part of the problem, I would argue, is that the Democratic Party leadership believes that we can restore normality.
Right.
The MAGA folks aren't interested in normality.
So
So there is no going back.
No.
There's either going forward, it's one of these march or die situations. And we need to be the ones that are basically saying if the Democratic Party leadership does not want to move forward, we need to push them.
Right. Well,
And
that's
we need to have organizations that are doing that.
I think that for us in the 90s coming back up, we always said we cannot wait for other people to save us. We have to save ourselves. That is
That's exactly right.
And then people and even on the left, there were a lot of people who were not supportive of for example, the AIDS movement. There was a lot of infighting that took place first within that because there were people who felt that they were more tethered to some of the gains they had gotten from the LGBT movement and stuff. So there was, there's a process there. But the other thing I would say is that for me, I'm looking at a lot of other countries who have been dealing with authoritarianism and autocracy to see what their lessons are. And certainly one of them is educating the Congress as well, that they feel like, for example, Hungary, after the fact, once they lost their rights, they realized they had stopped talking exactly what you say, Bill, and they stopped talking about the rule of law. Steve, they didn't educate their workers to really think about the different ways in which they needed to be mobilizing apart from just, a standard grievance process, if you're a worker. And that is the work that's been happening because they're under authoritarianism. In other words, they have a stronger democratic movement now, they think, than they had before Orban came into power, which is fascinating. I hope we don't have to go through that. But one of the silver linings for us may be that we have opportunities to get created by getting a common enemy, extremely facing this kind of oppression.
That's what happened in the first Trump administration.
Absolutely.
You had the unsiloing
And we
of
have
all
that
of the left
happening
issues.
around this country.
Right.
So many people are awake. So many young people are awake. Even all the people who are sort of saying like, we're not going to participate potentially in the elections or uncommitted or we're opposed or we're 30, whatever. They are not in any way disengaged. These people are very engaged. And while there are people who may not be because they're not having their needs met on any level, we do see a true opportunities here for really talking about these issues that are going to get us to maybe more political engagement and get us to more reform. So we'll have to see where we are at, in a month from now. But as I agree with you, we can't stop. We need to really be mobilizing now. We need to be talking about that in these different sectors, because people know the agenda, whether you're in a climate issue or whether you're in reproductive health, you see the crossover, but we have a tremendous need right now to really be preparing people and to be very concrete about the engagement between civil society and what may be done by government or may not be done. We have a responsibility as civil society to protect people in government. We need to be talking to Chuck Schumer. We need to be, talking to unions. We need to be talking to private unions about their responsibility toward public unions, all of it, because this is incredibly serious. And, as we said over and over, it's unprecedented that we may be facing this moment. So
here's a question for anyone who wants to pipe up about what is it going to take? We know that like Project 2025, right? Heritage Foundation starts it, has billions of dollars from Leonard Leo and the Kochs and quite a few other very, very rich guys, but very, very, very rich guys, and women, men and women, don't want to be sexist. And 104 major conservative, I hate using that word because they're not conservative, they're radicals, conservative organizations and leaders got together, former people from government got together, participated in it. So this is something that's running through all of the right wing. And this is something that's coordinated, it's been going on for years. What is it going to take for the left to have that level of cross-organizational civil society cooperation and coordination? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I don't think it's gonna
Not
be
you,
religion. Not saying
our
it's not gonna
guests.
be religion, which is a big one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, a couple of thoughts. One is, I don't know how, there are like a huge coalition of organizations involved in Project 2025, but I think it's a mistake to assume that they're as cohesive as they might seem at first. And that was really one of the goals of Project 2025. It was to set up this like Potemkin village to make the conservative movement seem like it was much fiercer and more powerful than it really is. That is why you put out a 900-page book, right? You're really compensating for something by releasing.
And we've heard there are a lot of divisions.
Yeah, but this is a regular thing. It's not like the Project 2025. Project 2025 in itself is new. The mandate for leadership document, which is what that document is, it's a longer one, but they've been doing it every time. They've been preparing one every single 4 years, and when a Republican wins, they give it to the Republican. So that's the level. That's the kind of coordination that I'm talking about on the left, because we don't have that level to the point where we've got lefty organizations preparing huge policy documents that they're able to get access to the newly elected Democratic president of the United States, able to put it in front of him, and then that Democratic president goes on to get 50 to 60 to 70% of those policy prescriptions moving during their administration. We don't do that on the left. So what's it going to take?
Well,
So Bill's hand is up.
let's
Just say we have a couple minutes here, so just
Yeah.
get everyone.
real quick. Part of the problem is that the Republican Party has been captured by the far right. It is now a party for dictatorship. It is an authoritarian party. The Democratic Party is at least 5 different parties. So it's not like we could just give them something and say, okay, Jack, this is the plan, right? Because there are all of these divisions. So first of all, that's one factor that we have to keep in mind. The second thing is that much of the Democratic Party leadership is very fearful of the left. They're scared of the right, but they are very fearful of the left, and they are afraid that we are going to ultimately upset the apple cart. And actually, they have good reason to believe that, because that's what we want to do. But we also have a common, right? But we also have a common opponent in MAGA that needs to be crushed politically, right? So that's what we're up against. The other thing, and I'll make this a final comment, is that we have to always keep in mind we are in an asymmetric war with them. We're never going to have the resources that they have. And so when we fret over, oh my God, they have all this money, the oppressed never have more money than the oppressor. Never in history.
We have the majority. We are the majority. That's certainly
right.
Not just the majority of the people who are opposed to Project 2025. We are the vast majority. So that is something to remember. Now, people may not be mobilized, they may not be political, they may not be ready to be organized, But we know that they do not believe in what Project 2025 is seeking, and that is a great starting point. We just have a couple minutes here, so I just want to give some final opportunities for statements. Steve, you've been hearing this whole thing. I mean, what do you want to try to get done yourself between now and January 21st?
Well, as I said, schedule life information is number one. But also, the messaging is important, but it's hard to motivate people on political theory, right? So things have to happen before people take anything seriously. And for those of us who know it's coming one way or the other, whether it's 4 years from now or whether it's, a couple of months from now, this is going to happen. JD Vance talked about Project 2025 as a long-term investment. I mean, this is something that they want to do for decades. The messaging is incredibly important. It's because it's so expansive. People are going to see strange things happen if Trump wins. People are going to question, why are these things happening? Congress is going to question the executive branch. The executive branch is not going to answer them. They're going to interfere with investigations and so forth. So it's going to leave a lot of Americans not understanding exactly what's going on. They haven't done the math between the SCOTUS decision to Project 2025 to Schedule F to how that impacts their life. They haven't done that yet because they haven't seen it yet because it largely hasn't happened. But when it does, I think they're going to figure it out the hard way. Like we always have to do everything the hard way in this country for some reason. But when it does, I hope that we do come together. And people on the right too. A lot of Republicans are concerned about this as well too. They see where this is headed and it's not in a very good direction. So let that be the motivator if it must. But I do hope we all come together and do the math on this pretty quickly.
Yep. James?
The way I'm sort of thinking about the next few months is we need to be prepared, but not overly prepared, because, during the Trump administration, some of the best moments of resistance were the ones that were really sprouted up organically. And that's not to say those things just happened, right? There was
Correct.
the right level of preparedness. But if you're over prepared, you can prevent those sorts of things from happening. The other thing I would say is Project 2025 is scary, but we can't be scared of it, right? It's meant to intimidate. We cannot allow ourselves to be intimidated, because the fact of the matter is there is a lot of division hiding in plain sight in there. There's a lot of incompetence, right? They want to convince us they are competent this time and disciplined. They are not. I was just reading this morning, Trump has 3 different transition teams and they're all fighting with each other right now. So, no joke. So, this is not to say we should just not take this seriously, but the fact of the matter is we can't allow ourselves to be intimidated by essentially incompetent twits like they are. And I think that puts us in a much better position to fight back.
Well, I'm going to say for myself that I think our campaign is looking to see where are people organizing and advancing, where are there opportunities, the silver lining moments that are coming up. I think it's very exciting to see how much mobilization has happened, including around the elections, that people are super engaged. And that's very positive, that people are deeply caring about what happens to their country and care about their constitution, their democracy, all of that. The question is how we'll do it. So, for our campaign, we're going to be focusing very much on looking at that resistance and preparedness and trying to put tools into the hands of people. Jay, I'm going to give you the last word here, but saying just to folks that we're going to be putting up a slide right in a minute, which has information on a toolkit that the NFFE has put together on Schedule F, so that you can learn more. And I just want to encourage everyone to also take a look at the Center for Progressive Reform. Please, of course, take a look at our unfolding agenda, which really talks about how all this is kind of unfolding. And so you know who to watch for in the next 2 weeks as the debate is happening hot and heavy, I imagine. And so, Jay.
Oh, just ignore the polls. Ignore polls. They mean nothing. They're literally a tiny little group of people that actually answer their landlines or answer their phones when they don't know who's calling them. So ignore them. They're crazy people. And you vote, don't get disillusioned, don't get frightened, vote. That's the most important thing that any of us can do to stop this kind of hellscape from being unleashed on our country. Vote, vote, vote.
And just know that if you haven't yet signed up,
I
we
thought
have a
I was having
newsletter.
their last word, huh? I just.
It's the last word.
She
I-
can't give anyone else. the last
I
word.
just wanted to mention, people should check out our campaign newsletter, because we have a newsletter and we put out information about every 2 weeks, so you can keep informed about information if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, and sign up for that. And I just finally want to say thank you to our guests for joining us tonight. We're going to keep track and keep promoting and put their resources up and our ally resources. And we're inviting other groups who may be listening to please share any resources you have, particularly practical resources for responding to Project 2025's agenda. There you go. To learn more about Schedule F and labor tax, the NFFE toolkit, nffe.org, advocacy issues by subject /P2025 or P25, sorry. And the final word, thank you so much again to the Bureau, and
Thank
we
you.
will see you all on the 21st of,
No,
7th.
7th.
2 days after the
2
election.
days after the election, we'll be back.
We'll be in it. We'll be back. Amazing guests. Thank you so much on behalf of the Gender Democracy Project and Stop the Coup 2025.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Great call.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.